Okay, so let's just take a quick tour, not for SketchUp geeks, but this is basically just any folks that are interested in the MikroBench and maybe how it got built and designed. So basically focusing on the design. Now this is absolutely insane because this shows everything that can possibly go onto it. So I've got some drill presses here. Those are, as close as I'm going to take to drawing those. Drivers like 18-volt drivers like the Milwaukee. I just basically looking for the footprint that they take up and the height that they take up. Same thing with the drill presses. You can see in there's a Kreg. Down deep in there's a miter saw, which is a Milwaukee 18-volt, and then even here these are the plates for a two two bandsaws, believe it or not. And then this is the basic bench. There's what would be a festool table right there to see how that mounted. Then this is a red cart that's sold by Harbor Freight, and so on. But basically, let's just go real quick and we'll look at where this all starts. So it starts, and by the way, for those of you that might follow along in SketchUp or SketchUp Viewer, SketchUp, along the top is where at least my tabs are, taking to each one of these different scenes. And then in SketchUp Viewer, those tabs are along the left side. So this is tray one, and I'll just do a quick inside look at it. Basically, you've got what I would call the front, the back, and then these are the spreaders, and then there's a floor on it, and then there's a top, and then there's some joinery, which is a combination of spline joinery and then also some screws. This thing is really built like a brick outhouse. This thing is meant to withstand a huge amount of abuse. So that's that. Then what we can do is we can add a second tray to it. These are the risers, and those are cut at a 30-degree angle. The reason for that is they allow it to go back. Like if we look at the, let's just look at the drill press. Okay, so if we have the drill press on, this is why I drew those up. Just basically, if you've got that motor that hangs off the back, well, as you notice, you can have the drill presses on there. There's 4 of them showing right now. You'd obviously only use maybe 2 at max, maybe 1, but I wanted to show them in all the several different positions. But they clear that second tray, and the reason they do that is because of those risers. So let's go back to that. And then, so on top of that is, so again, we have the tray 1, we have the risers, and then we have tray 2, which is here. It doesn't look like much right now, but we'll show you a little bit more about that later. And then we have tray 3. Again, doesn't look like much. They're a little bit smaller. So tray 2 is just a little bit smaller than tray 1. And the reason for that is that then they can, when they're taken down, this is all knockdown joinery that's going to hold. It's not knockdown joinery. This bench, the big part, that's going to be permanent, but everything from that point up is knockdown. So from here, if I look at, for instance, real quick, like I look at the joinery on there, that's a threaded tenon joinery. So all it is just a bolt that holds it on. Same thing up here. Those can be knocked down, and then all the joinery up here is knocked down as well. So they can all be taken apart. And then so if we take tray 3 apart, like for transporting, for storing, I take them on the RV all the time. Or if we get to, say, for instance, the miter saw and the bandsaws. I don't show the saws themselves. I'm just basically working on the plates right now. But because they're too tall, the tray 3 and tray 2 would interfere with those. So the design basically said, let's be able to take those off, do knockdown joinery, and then when we want to, we can just stuff them down below underneath for transport. So then what's going to be on here is there's different templates. I won't go into that right now. I'll cover that later in templates, but these are templates that people can use, that I can use, my students can use to make some of the cavities, not all of the cavities, but some of the cavities. And then this is the real nuts and bolts of it, and these are the overlays. So these are actually two-dimensional. They're designed as two-dimensional, so I can use them as for the CNC. But these are where all of the cavities are involved. All right, so then if I go over to, for instance, this tab up here, CNC, each one of these eventually shows up in this CNC batch. They're all two-dimensional, which is what I need to do when I want to pull them into the software that is used to create the CNC paths. And so I do that. So again, but here's how they would show up here, which would be on the tray 1. So right here, we've got some places that are going to be for some clamps. We have down here ability to clamp it to various tables and so on. Those are going to be full through holes. Up here we have some things for vices. We have holes to show clamps. We have holes and cavities for bits. We have for ruler. We have a bunch of other stuff in there. I'll cover that later. And then we have built-in vices, which is these two. They're wood. They're hardwood, right? But they are attached, or can be attached to the front, and they're not meant for clamping for glue ups, but what they are meant for is just holding that piece of material while you're doing some joinery or whatever. All right, it just, again, there are 5/16 bolts that go in there. These little guys stick up on top in case you have wider stuff. You can put some dog holes back in here, and then you can do wider stuff with it. So again, I'll cover more of that later, but that's the clamp. Now the drivers would typically go on tray number 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You've got 6 of them there. I don't want to introduce it yet, but I'm looking at also adding 2 more trays that would go off to the side, and those are for the drivers. They're going to be in the way for a lot of stuff, but when I'm really doing stuff where I want 5 or 6 different drivers all set up with a particular bit plus my 18-volt routers, then I'll have all kinds of places to put those. So let's just go back to that. And then in part of the design was, again, for the drill presses, to be able to run at least 1 drill press, 2 drill presses quite easily. Then we have the bandsaw plates. And again, there would be a 10-inch Rikon. It is the one that I've designed it for. Craftsman used to use Rikon, I believe. So you can put 2 of those on. You couldn't put those on and the drill presses, etc., but you can run up to 2. So for instance, when I do these, I'm going to be having all different, I'm going to probably have 5, 6, 7, 8 of these benches around. Some of them are going to be set up with bandsaws, some are going to be set up with drill presses. Then we've got the miter saw, which would be for the 18-volt type. I have a Milwaukee 18-volt 7 1/4, and then the clamping is huge for me. I do a lot of glue ups, and so it's all set up to do clamping. The clamps are already basically ready to go. These are the R&R clamps. You don't see too much of those. They're out there. They've been around for a long time. Just actually a pretty well kept secret. They're not cheap. I'm going to say they're 25, 30 bucks each, but they really, really do the job for clamping. But you can see what happens here is that not only can I clamp, but because of the tray and the alignment of each of those clamps, then I can still have tray number 2 and I can still have tray number 3. So on tray number 2, I can still have my drivers, and then I can have some of my hardware. And again, at some point, we'll get into tray number 4, which would be these side trays. Well, those will actually still fit next to the clamps. And then we have pocket holes. Pocket holes, typically you think of Kreg's, right? But this will basically work with any pocket hole jig. And over the years, Kreg has changed their design so much that I wasn't even going to try to create like holes specifically for that. Instead, whoever has this would use the holes from the bandsaws. So basically it would be making a plate that has the same hole pattern as this. I'll give you that pattern, but then that would be the plate. So then all you'd have to do is mount the pocket hole jig on one of those plates, and then they're all ready to go. You can put 2, 3, 4 of them on there probably. And as far as mounting goes, I wanted to make sure I have all these different options for mounting. So this would be a typical, the top to a festool table, and there's different ways to mount it. I'm showing on one of them these slots down at the bottom here. There's 3 slots. Those go full through, and there you can just use the regular festool clamps that come with the festool table, or that you buy for the festool table, and then they'll go right into those clamps. Same thing with the Kreg table, the workstation, it'll fit on there. And then I have a lot of this scaffolding around, so I wanted to be able to, I don't show the whole scaffolding, but basically you've seen this stuff out there. It's available at Menards and Home Depot and Lowe's, Fleet Farm, etc. But it's on casters. There's a common denominator, which is a 27.5-inch on center spacing from here to here, those holes, and then each of those holes is 2-inch on center. So I've designed it so that everything will fit for that type of spacing. The only thing that a person needs to add is this wider board, because the bench itself isn't quite as wide as the scaffold. I'll cover that later. And then there's the red carts. I have I think I have 6 of these I bought over the years. These are the ones with the drawers in them. You put your tools in them. They're rolling carts. I bought them at Harbor Freight. You have to assemble them yourself, kind of a pain, but once you get into doing one of them, it's no big deal. But that they have some common denominators as well, and that is there's basically two sets of holes here. And so what I did is I designed this so that if you want to mount it to those, you're all set to go. And there's the hardware will go right through the bench into the red cart. And then because I'm traveling a lot RV wise, I have a hitch receiver, or basically a hitch, they call it a bed extender for like hauling lumber and so on a pickup truck, and it sticks right out of the 2-inch receiver. I've already owned one of these, but they're available for 80 to 150 bucks depending on where you go. I've seen them at I think it's Harbor Freight for 65, 70 bucks. Well, same thing. Now what we have here is using the exact same hole pattern that we did on the red cart. We're able to mount them by bolt to those by putting some bolts through there, which is a really solid thing. Or there's another way to do it, and I'll explain that. That's basically we take these two vices, can make 2 more of those or 1, and the whole pattern on the back side is the same, and they can hook right over the top of that. So within just a few seconds you can hang it over the top of those. And then again, this RV or the receiver, it not only works on my pickup truck, but our RV also has a 2-inch receiver on the back. So I can work off the back of the RV by just taking that same bed extender, sticking it in the RV, and I'm all set to go. So that's that mounting. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get into the cut list. I won't do that right now. I won't talk about too much, but basically I'm saying for this project, you can take 2 stair treads that you can buy at Home Depot. The pine are 10 bucks a piece. You got 20 bucks invested. The oak are about $25 a piece. So you might have 50 bucks with 2 stair treads. And if you follow this cut pattern, one right after the other. So right down here, number 1, cross cut at 24 inch. So it tells you exactly where to cross cut. And then it even tells you to straddle the mark because you're going to lose a little bit to the kerf. Then it goes over to number 2, set this edge to the table saw, set the saw to 5.5, etc., etc. Well, as long as you follow that pattern, and I did this, I cut up this board completely in less than 10 minutes, maybe 15. And then this one took a little more because there's a lot more going on, but this basically ends up being your tray number 2, your risers, the vices, tray number 3, the spreaders are in here. So, and then if we, excuse me, didn't mean to do that. But if we go down to this one right here, this is tray number 1, and then these are the front and the back. So everything is all there. And again, there's a cut list and an order that shows you how to do it. And then the design itself, also I wanted to take every single board and say, all right, where are the cavities going to go, and how am I going to put those cavities in there? So the cavities can be put in via CNC. If you have a CNC, I've included with the Instructables the CNC files, both the tap and a CRV, but there's also a SketchUp file in there, so that any one of those options would work if you have a CNC where you're probably pretty close to ready to go. And then I also set up with these manual templates where this is all one template, but it's used in all different kinds of locations. So I'll cover that as we get through, but those are part of the design process. And then what we want to do is be able to look at how do we assemble like the bench. Most of it is knocked, the tray 2 and tray 3 are knocked down. So when we get into tray 3, like here, there is no assembly because this is knocked down, this is knocked down, everything's knocked down. So once you install that hardware, you just need a bolt and you can't miss. It's absolutely foolproof on that. But when we get into tray number 1, I provide a little more detail on how to assemble that tray. So I have the parts here. I have a list of everything in sequence in chronological order. Do this, then do this, then do this. As long as you follow that chronological order, you're going to be in good shape. And it kind of shows how this bench is put together. The first layer, there's the front again, the back, the 2 spreaders, the floor, the bolts, not bolts, but the screws that are going to go through there. And then there's the floor. The floor fits into a dado on each side. It fits into a dado that we put in the spreaders. And then there's even dados on the bottom of the top that would go on to the top here. So we'll cover that. That's all spline joinery. And then on the threaded tenons, which is the knockdown portions, I also have two templates, basically one template, but it serves two purposes. This is, for instance, is the riser, and then which is at the diagonal, the 30-degree mitered cut, and then this would be your typical 1" by 3" board, and then here I show how each of those templates would be used to install the hardware, so they're all part of that. And then there's a description on how the vices as far as how they're going to be attached, where they're going to go, and then there's basically a template for drilling some holes in there. And then for those of you that are into CNC, here are all the CNC runs. You can segregate them. What I do when I run it, I have separate videos in there on how to convert or basically import a SketchUp file into VCarve, and it has to do with hiding those, leaving the one that you want to work on, saving the file, going into VCarve, and then so on. But so Control Z that out of there. And then I have an index up at top here. You can see that, the tab, and that index then makes it puts everything in one place in terms of what are each of those cavities for. So for instance, here's tray number 1. And this points to a hole that would be used for the metal worker's 1/4" punch, which is a really common thing for everything that I do. That and hinge bits, like here's a hinge bit hole, and that way everything is right there. Only the stuff that I need are going to be right there on tray number 1. And then we have some drill press, like the base holes. There's 1, 2, 3. Those are the holes that are intended for that'll fit a Wen 8", a steel 8", and a Rikon, believe it or not. So and there's a set there, there's a set over here. So if you go around every single DeWalt 9" tape, a 3" Inker rule, a speed square, etc., they're all there on tray number 1. And then we have tray number 2, has some dividers to kind of support the drivers if you need to. There's digital calipers, Incra rules, rectangular washers, there's hardware on there, there's bolts, so on, etc. And then tray number 3, which is it looks a little different than you're going to see it in real life, because the template to make the CNC, not the template, but the CNC run is done just a little bit different than the board, because there's some goofy openings in the front for the large mug, the wine glass, and the bottle. Again, if you're into CNC, I think you probably already figured out what the difference is or why I do that. And then again, when we take it all, it's all right there. It's just that you can't see everything all at one time. Instead, that's why you go up to these tabs and just pick that particular one that you want to see, like the vices, the drill presses, and so on. And again, not doing it part of this project, but upcoming would be a tray number 4 and possibly even some other trays. So that's a quick tour of the MikroBench, the basic, tray 3, the templates, overlays, etc., etc., etc. Thanks for watching.